Frank, thank you so much for joining us. And before we jump right into our discussion, I thought I'd give a quick introduction, although Frank D'Souza needs no introduction, my friends. He has been one of the youngest founders and entrepreneurs in the IT services industry. He started by founding Cognizant and took over as a CEO in 2006 when it was just $1 billion. By the time he left in 2019, it was $16 billion. So this man here has been through many ups and downs in the industry, and that's frankly the reason why I have a lot of respect for his experience. Since I have joined the industry, he's been a mentor and a coach to me. And I thought as part of today's discussion, I would share with you some of the wisdom that he has shared with me. So thank you very much. But after 2019, he was still a very young CEO. I think you took over in your late 30s. So when he was done, he had so much more to give. So he went and started a private equity fund with some partners. It's called Recognize. It specializes, among other things, in IT services, and it's been a fantastic run. They have started their second fund, which is a testament to how well they've done. And over the last few years, we've had several conversations, and I thought I would just surface those back up again for your benefit, right? So, Frank, I must say, I look at your career, and it's gone through so many levels of evolution. I had one question, personal, before I get into the industry. What keeps you motivated through all these years of being in the same industry but experiencing it in different ways?
Well, first of all, Ranjit, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I've loved our conversations over the past several years and what you're doing here at Ness. You know, I love this industry. I think that technology services, consulting more broadly, gives you this incredible opportunity to work with clients, to work with them on the things that are most topical, most top of mind for them, perhaps most difficult sometimes, and work alongside clients to help solve those problems. I mean, to me, that's just, and you know, as you do that with clients, you're helping, you know, kind of advance each company, each business, and therefore the economy in a small way, and then society in a small way. And like it's just a great place to be.
I agree with you. I've been in this industry for now 6 years, and there is never a dull day. That much I can tell you in this world, which is really the point of my first question. So you have seen many ups and downs in the industry. I mean, you started perhaps with the .com, and then the Y2K, then the digital revolution, and more recently AI. If you look at where we are as an industry today, it has gone through a fairly prolonged period of, what should I say, slower growth than what we are used to. Do you think there are some similarities with where we are today versus what you've experienced? And are there some fundamental differences? So I would love your perspective on what are the similarities and differences that any CXO in this industry needs to think of as they look to the future.
Yeah. First of all, Ranjit, I would say, you know, it depends on which lens you look at the industry through before you reach the conclusion that it's going through a period of slow growth. You know, I would argue that if you include firms like Palantir and others that you and I have talked about, particularly if you think about growth in market cap and market value, you're seeing some pretty dramatic numbers there on the upside. So I think it's important, and the reason I contextualize that is because we are going through a big period of change. And I don't think this is exactly the same as prior periods of change. So if I look at the industry in, let's call it the last 30 years or so, in the last 30 years, we've had a number of technology changes. You said, you know, there was cloud, there was mobile, there was, you talked about Y2K, you talked about client server, all of those things. All of those, though, were technology evolutions but didn't fundamentally require that we change the operating model of the industry. So now that's not entirely true. You could make the case that as agile development came along, it changed the operating model and so on and so forth. But in my mind, those were rather incremental changes. The only time in 30 years where this industry has completely changed the operating model was in the 1990s when offshoring came to the industry. And that's the kind of moment that we are facing today. Because if you think that AI is simply another technology like cloud was or mobile or whatever client server, I think you've got it wrong. I think that the difference here is that this is not just a new technology, it's also going to drive a fundamental change in the way the industry has to operate. Because we've never had a technology like this that's going to drive as much productivity, I believe, and change the way that we have to work as an industry. And that's what makes this moment different from other waves. So you have two big things going on. You've got a technology change and you've got an operating model change.
It's interesting. So your original framing that you should think of it as not a slow growth period, but there are some models that are growing much faster than the traditional ones, and you have to move to the new models.
Yeah.
If you were to look at that operating model shift, are there one or two salient features of that shift in operating model in the new world of AI-enabled transformation?
Well, look, I think the model is still emerging. And so none of us have like perfect clarity on what the future is going to look like. But I do think there are some things that we should be thinking about. First of all, I think the skills pyramid changes. Right? So are we going to be more in a diamond-shaped model versus a pyramid? We've talked about this for quite some time.
Yeah.
My sense is that we drive much more towards that. That has follow-on implications for the industry, which is then how do we train and develop people? If the client engagement model is going to be more of a diamond shape, or maybe even an upside-down pyramid, then the industry has to figure out, well, how are we going to bring people into the industry? Because the bottom of the pyramid has always been the way to bring people into the industry. So that's a set of issues that we've got to figure out. So I think one will be the change in the pyramid, because we know that AI today is particularly good at doing the things that we historically thought of as things that were done at the bottom of the pyramid. And so if AI is going to automate that, then it follows that the pyramid shape will change to a diamond or to an upside-down pyramid. So that's one. I think that there is going to be this sort of what do the roles look like? Because I don't think that you're just going to turn to a diamond or an upside-down pyramid, but populate that with the same kinds of people and the same skills that we did in the past. The people that occupy each of those spots is also going to be different. Right? I think we're going to see new jobs emerging. I think every single one of the jobs in the pyramid or in the upside-down pyramid or in the diamond are going to be sort of humans that are superhumans enabled by an AI co-pilot or something like that. Which then brings me to a third dimension, which is getting the model right of how humans and AI work together is going to be, I think, incredibly important. Because what you're going to find is, at least my view, is that AI will get better and better over time. And so if you pair up a human and AI today, what that pairing looks like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now is going to be very different. Because the AI is going to get better and better and better. And so there's going to have to be a continual evolution of that relationship. I don't think, by the way, that AI removes humans from the loop entirely. I think that's, and that we can have a debate about that. But my view is that those three things are going to be at least some important element of what this model of the future looks like.
I could agree with you more. And we are seeing aspects of that play out even today in the type of talent that is being attracted to this market, and frankly, the jobs that are being created in this market. Now, when it came to the operating model, there are two views to it, right? One is how do you manage talent and the roles and the skills associated with. But there's also another part of the operating model which I'd love for you to comment on, which is how do we engage our customers? Yes. Our traditional model, despite our best attempts for the last 30 years, and I still remember having this discussion about how do we decouple revenue from FTE? Yes, and that comes down to the fundamental commercial models with which we engage our customers. They have been primarily T&M related. People talk about outcome-oriented structures, and every conference I go to, there is some version of that. How real do you think that is, given where we are? And what are the, how should I say, if it needs to be made more real, what are the changes the industry has to go through?
Yeah. Look, I think this is a tricky one, but you're absolutely right. There's no question that if, look, the way I frame this issue is, Ranjit, that if you believe that AI is going to have this potential to make what we do today far more productive. In other words, we're going to be able to do what we do today for some unit output of work. We're going to be able to do that output of work with less humans and more automation. If you believe that, which I do, then unless we find new commercial models, what will wind up happening is that we will wind up passing that benefit mostly along to the client, as opposed to retaining some or all of that benefit for ourselves. And in fact, it might be even worse than that, because in order to achieve that benefit, which over time competition is going to require that you drive, because even if you don't, somebody else will, and it'll pull you to doing it, that in order to do that, you're going to have to invest in tooling that most likely is going to come from a third party. You're going to have to buy Microsoft's Copilot, you're going to have to buy Cursor, whatever the tool is or tool set is. And so you're going to, on the one side, if you don't change the commercial model, you're going to lose the ability to capture that benefit. And in fact, you might actually be worse off, because you're not only are you not capturing the benefit, but you're also spending to acquire the tool set, and competition could drive you there. So the imperative in my mind is very strong. Like, if you don't figure out new pricing models in this new world, I think it's a race somewhat to the bottom.
It is.
So the question is, what are those new pricing models, Ranjit? And I think it's just starting to emerge. But there are two models that I think are, and both variants that I think show some promise. And they start with the fact that in the world of the future, the best firms in this space are going to deliver with a combination of humans and IP, let's call it, generically. That IP could be AI, but it could also be other forms of IP. You could have data, you could have other things, right? Platforms, and so on. And so, while that wasn't necessarily the case for the last couple of decades or longer, as you pointed out, now the bundle allows you to create some interesting pricing models. I think the most interesting one, obviously, is if you can get to some kind of outcome pricing. So one of the businesses we've just invested in, Ranjit, is a business called Health Edge. And Health Edge is a business that serves the health insurance industry, and one of their pricing models is per member per month. So we charge the customer a fee per member per month, and obviously what that fee is depends on what bundle of services we're offering that particular client. But it's a volume metric that we can charge the customer.
And it's a business metric.
And it's a business volume metric, right? It's how many members do you have, and we charge you for that number of members per month. And therefore, if we capture productivity, if we are more efficient, then we are able to capture that benefit. So that kind of a model, I think, is sometimes or oftentimes ideal if you can get there. Of course, it requires you to have deep subject matter knowledge of the particular process area or the particular business area that you're involved with. The other thing that I've started to see emerging is this idea of bundling squads with tooling and creating kind of a squad price for a little bit like Globant has announced their pod pricing and so on and so forth. And so sort of the bundling of humans and IP into squads and kind of charging for the squad, I think is a second model, which allows you to get to some of those. But I think if we don't get to some version of these two models, I think it becomes, as I said, a bit of a race to the bottom.
Listen, I'm a big believer in that, and I have to be honest with you that I don't think that anybody that I talk to would disagree with what you and I just discussed. It's been hard to execute. I have a hypothesis, and I'll just say it, but I think both within IT services, we've got a sales motion which presumes a headcount-based approach to, and breaking out of that is very uncomfortable. But I also think on the buyer side, there is a buyer behavior which wants the old way of pricing. So anytime we talk about outcome-oriented, they say, "Oh, I think it's a great idea. Can you give me a rate card, please?" And that's just their comfort zone. How does one break through that as a leader on both sides, on our side as well as the customer side?
Yeah. Look, I think that I'll answer the question specifically, but let me zoom out a little bit first, which is that, what we're discussing here, Ranjit, is this, that, the industry and the technology industry in general, and then technology services or IT services, we experience these S-curves all the time. And, we jump onto an S-curve and we ride the S-curve, and it works really well for a period of time. And then we reach the end of that S-curve. Whether that S-curve is a technology, as happened, we don't really talk about mainframes that much anymore because we reached the top of that S-curve, and then there was the client-server wave, or it could be a business model S-curve. And right now, I think we're kind of at the top of a business model S-curve, and we've got to figure out how to jump to the next S-curve. And I think that's the framing that we need to have. It's just that we're never going to go back to the past. And if you try to hold on to the past, whether you're a buyer or whether you're a provider, you're basically clinging to a model of yesterday, which over time will not work. I think that if you think about it from a buyer perspective, the buyer may say, and I see this all the time, let me go back to the rate card. And we all know where that game ends, right? Over time, that just means that the client doesn't get the best resource, doesn't get the best team, because in some senses in this, if you're just purely in a time materials world, you kind of get what you pay for, right? And so if the clients can continuously pushing the price down, at some point, look, you can drive productivity and so on and so forth, but at some point something has to give, and that usually is quality.
Yes.
And so I think that's going to, there'll be a realization of this over time, that just pushing on price and pushing on rate cards and so on and so forth isn't good for the provider, and it isn't good for the customer either over time. But sorry, Ranjit. The other thing I would say though is that the industry, like, let's be honest, historically this industry's average percent of revenue spent on R&D has been 0, or close to 0.
Yes.
And I don't think that can continue. If you want to be able to get in front of a client and say, listen, I want to go to an output or an outcome-based model, you have to be able to demonstrate some real capability and, importantly, some real IP there. To say, look, the reason you want to go with me to an outcome or an output-based model is I've got some real capability here, and that capability has to show up not just in the minds of people. It's got to show up in real IP. It's got to show up in real platforms. And if you think about, we briefly mentioned Palantir. If you talk about Palantir, they've got the Foundry platform and so on and so forth. So you've got to have, and so there needs to be over time the willingness to invest in these platforms to really develop IP. And IP can take the form of platforms, but I think, I personally believe that over time we'll also see data emerging as a core differentiator. If you have proprietary data sets, if you happen to know how to do something better than anybody else, and you've got a real proprietary data set around that, I think that can also be a moat.
It's very interesting you say that. many of the big data companies of today started as services companies, Reuters being one. And today you sell news as a feed for money because they have proprietary data, and maybe IT services needs to have the same sort of frame to what we do. Your point around investment rings so true. I mean, in most of other industries, it is a non-trivial percentage of revenue. I think in our world it is less than 1%, if at all, as you rightly said. Changing topics, AI, you started talking about AI's impact on talent models.
Yep.
Yes. Now, I have two versions of reality, and I'd love for you to give me yours. Which one do you believe in? Maybe there's a third. That AI is changing, improving the productivity, and therefore we just need less people. Yes, and there is a version of that in media. So I have stories about the large tech firms in California, Meta, IBM. They are laying a lot of people off, and they're saying they're getting huge benefits out of AI for productivity gain. Very believable, and I can see that. But then there's another version, which is we are at the beginning of an S-curve. The impact is not that big just yet. It may happen, but today it's mostly a function of standard business management, where you have extra capacity and you reduce the capacity. That's what we always do, but it's being done with a banner of AI. How much of this is true? Help me sort through this.
Look, I don't have a crystal ball here on this one, Ranjit. Look, there's no question in my mind that both are true. But it's hard to know the relative magnitude of each one. There's no question that across the economy, we probably overhired during the pandemic. As you know, there was a lot of demand, there was a lot of economic activity, there was a burst of economic activity during the pandemic, and I think workforces really grew during that period of time, despite the uncertainty. And so I think there's some of that, there's some of what you're seeing now, which is just a return to perhaps a more normalized level of workforce. Having said that, I think we'd be foolish not to think that AI is not driving productivity in certain jobs. And now I'm talking broadly. I'm not just talking about IT jobs, but I'm talking about contact center jobs. I'm talking about, I mean, we've seen it. We know this to be true, and those benefits will, ripple through the entire economy, and they'll certainly cause displacement. But at the same time, I think it is true that we are seeing new jobs being created, new categories of jobs being created, and we are also seeing that, Jeevan's paradox, that as price or cost comes down, demand goes up. So how this all settles out, I think it's difficult to know. I do think we're already starting to see, you're going to see disruption. I think that's going to be uncomfortable, as we've seen in the last month or two. But at the same time, we're also seeing new jobs that are being created. Look at Scale AI, for example. Scale AI was a business that was built on a set of jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago, didn't exist maybe even 5 years ago, and had a tremendous outcome with Meta, as you know. So there are new jobs that are being created. And, the World Economic Forum's jobs report says that 170 million new jobs will get created in the next decade. So, that's a pretty big number. So my sense is that there will be an equilibrium here. But getting from one side to the other will be difficult. There'll be a lot of displacement, and we're going to have to figure out how to get people from the places where they get displaced from to the places where the new opportunities emerge.
So you're now an investor. You're running a fund in tech services. So as you take into account some of these trends, how does your investment criteria change? I know you're on your second fund. So how would you invest differently in the next 3 years than what you did in the last 3 years, given these operating model shifts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the fundamentals remain similar in the sense that you're generally looking for great management teams that have a vision for what they want to build and a business model that's durable. What that means in today's world is different than what that meant 5 or 10 years ago. And so today, when we look at investments, we think very carefully about the AI implications, because we in our style of investing, we're investing in established businesses usually, and these businesses face some of the cross currents that we just talked about, and so we're just trying to understand, what is the disruptive potential of AI on a business, but then also what's the market opportunity that AI is going to create, because obviously AI has both sides of this, and then we look and say, is this a management team that is forward thinking enough that they can manage through the disruption and get us to the other side?
I agree with you. As somebody, we are a management team, and we are at the crossroads that the industry is. And I think the challenge for us is how do you run the business and at the same time change it? And that frankly is the single biggest challenge. Now, I'll wrap up this discussion with one thing. You talked about management teams, and Frank, I don't mean to embarrass you, but the management team that you built at Cognizant has gone on to become senior leaders in many very respected institutions, and that you have to take some credit for it in terms of your ability to build this kind of leadership team at Cognizant. What advice would you give in these times for all leaders who are trying to build their own management teams to cope with this new environment? Because running and changing the business is not easy.
Yeah. Look, I think I'll say a few things, Ranjit. First of all, for all the Cognizant alumni who are in great other places, the credit belongs to all of them, not to me. They've done amazing things, and I'm really proud of all of them. I think that but I'll take it back to where you started, which is that you said as a management team, the challenge you're facing is sort of how do you run the business and how do you change the business. I think we had a culture at Cognizant that those were not different things. That running the business is changing the business every day. There's no such thing as, like, if you set it up as a duality, that I have to run the business and I have to change the business, then it becomes sort of well, I'll do this one. Competing priorities, and I'll do this one in my spare time, because this is my real job is to run the business, and changing the business is a second thought. It's not the case. The case is, if you are running the business, if you're not changing the business every day when you're running the business, you are on your way to obsolescence. And you sort of have to adopt that mindset. Be paranoid, because look, change has never happened as fast as it's happening now, right? And I'm almost frustrated sometimes when somebody comes to me and says, boy, I wish the good old days would be back. And like, it doesn't happen that way, right? Like, if a year from now or 2 years from now, you find yourself as a firm, and I'm not saying this is going to happen to Ness, but if you're losing the market, if you feel as an individual that you're not relevant anymore, right? That's because you didn't change fast enough, right? And there's a great expression that says, if the world outside is changing faster than the world inside, then the end is near for you. And so you've got to wake up every morning and say, am I changing faster than the world outside is changing? Because that's the only way you're going to stay ahead. And so building a mindset that running the business and changing the business are not two separate things. It's your job every day, particularly as a leadership team, to wake up and say, every single thing that I do today will be obsolete tomorrow. And so how am I going to get ahead of that? And just having that mindset of constant reinvention and building a culture around constant reinvention is huge. And people will say, well, yeah, but I've got to meet my quarter, and I've got investors that worry about that. That's why you're the management team, right? That's why investors entrust their capital with you to make that, because the job as a leadership team is not to run the bottle of the past.
That's very well said. run and change are two sides of the same coin.
Two sides of the same coin.
That's very well said, and thank you so much, Frank. Talking to you is always stimulating, and I always come back with something that I learned. And I think we went through a whole bunch of topics. I could spend a lot of time synthesizing what you said, but I'll let the audience do that. But thank you very much for your time.
Ranjit, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks a lot.